We are often taught that the Jewish population in Europe were sent to their deaths by the Nazis at killing centers like Auschwitz. This assumption ignores the stories of countless Jews who perished in ghettos established by the Nazi regime. Before institutionalized killings were implemented, the Jewish population of Eastern Europe were forced to live in ghettos where epidemics and diseases influenced the daily lives of many Jewish residents. This process, now called ghettoization, led to the confinement of Jews into cramped ghettos primarily located in Poland. Sometimes, this ghettoization process has been viewed as a pit stop for the Jews on the way to the camps, when in fact many Jews spent months or even years struggling to survive in the rough daily conditions of the ghettos. The largest of these ghettos was the Warsaw Ghetto. While ghettos varied in size and purpose, they all were overcrowded. At the creation of the Warsaw Ghetto in 1940, roughly 390,000 residents lived in a small neighborhood of the city, with around 7 to 12 people sharing each room on average. This population fluctuated greatly until the Nazi authorities began mass deportations of the Jewish population to their deaths at killing centers similar to Auschwitz in July 1942. Additionally, residents of the ghetto had food supplies of as little as 200 calories per day due to the limited rations from the Nazi regime. A combination of the severe overcrowding and lackluster food supplies led to the spread of various epidemics and diseases. The impact of these diseases on the lives of the Jewish residents will be the focus of this video. We first need to understand the kinds of diseases that the Jewish residents experienced every day, starting with typhus. Typhus is the most well-recorded disease that afflicted the Jewish ghettos. Epidemic typhus, the variant most common in Jewish ghettos, is a bacterial-based illness spread by infected body lice. Typhus symptoms begin with fevers, coughing, and vomiting, followed by rashes and more intense complications, often resulting in death. While it may not have led to the most deaths in the ghetto, typhus served an important role in Nazi propaganda around Jewish stereotypes, used to paint them as dirty and disease-ridden. Typhus also served as a chief rationalization for their ghetto policy, as a scientific explanation for the forced isolation of Jewish populations. Many of the anti-epidemic policies placed in the ghettos were used to combat typhus through bathing and delousing procedures. Despite the panic that typhus caused, it never led to the highest mortality rate when compared to other diseases. One of the deadliest diseases across the ghettos was tuberculosis, sometimes simply called TB. This disease is caused by bacteria and is often spread from person to person through the air. TB usually affects the lungs, with symptoms including coughing, chest pain, and even the coughing up of blood. Due to how overcrowded the ghettos were, and how few medical supplies the hospitals had, tuberculosis spread throughout the ghetto, leading to more deaths than any other single disease. These, of course, were not the only diseases that impacted the Jewish ghettos during the Holocaust, but they are some of the most important in terms of impact on everyday life. The last category of diseases important for understanding why infection rates were so high are hunger-related diseases such as starvation. Starvation was caused by the constant lack of food supplies within the ghettos. Starvation and other hunger diseases could cause death by themselves, but the malnourishment of the residents weakened their immune systems beyond repair. All of these most prominent diseases could have been easily avoided through basic hygiene and adequate living space, both of which were stripped away by the Nazis. After the Holocaust, early historians focused their research on how many residents were killed by these diseases in the various ghettos. While the death toll and mortality rates between ghettos varied greatly, looking at statistics from the Warsaw Ghetto can give us a general understanding of the catastrophic loss of life caused by these epidemics and diseases. These tables showcase the general causes of death in the Warsaw Ghetto. While the totals for each category are only estimates, they can still help us understand how many lives were taken by different diseases. Of the nearly 100,000 residents that passed away in the Warsaw Ghetto, 30,000, or over 30%, died from tuberculosis, here called TB. Nearly 20% passed away due to hunger diseases, and around 3% died from typhus. These statistics also show us that the impact of typhus was not in actual deaths, but was due to propaganda, panic, and Nazi policy. Despite the high mortality rates caused by disease, the Jewish population fought the spread of infectious diseases however they could. In Warsaw, this medical resistance was organized as health services in the ghetto, led by courageous physicians, nurses, and other staff. The hospitals and their staff made use of what equipment they had, often relying on outdated tools and limited quantities of medicine. Hospital beds were often over capacity, especially during the worst of the epidemics and later in the war when starvation led to greater infection rates and other health problems. Vaccines and other medicines were rarely available, often needing to be smuggled in from outside of the ghetto. With limited resources and equipment, doctors had to choose which patients to prioritize. Children were protected before anyone else, as they were the future of the Jewish community. The elderly were often neglected, leading to deaths that could have been avoided if there was enough equipment or food supplies available. Anti-epidemic measures were also enforced by the Nazi regime, who feared that an outbreak would expand beyond the ghettos and into the greater cities. Whenever a case of typhus was recorded, the apartment complex of the resident needed to be disinfected. Residents, infected or living nearby, would need to go through disinfection protocols as well. They would be required to go to the public bathhouses, which were often overcrowded. Ironically, the long lines and poor sanitation methods used at the bathhouses made them the prime locations for the spread of infectious diseases. The last anti-epidemic measure enforced on residents was a quarantine within their apartments. Given the limited food supplies available, this was a near-death sentence. Many residents developed hunger-related diseases due to their time in quarantine, which then led to even greater spread of disease. Naturally, Jewish residents did whatever they could to escape these so-called anti-epidemic measures. While the physicians and staff did as much as they could to limit the spread of disease, the anti-epidemic policies and their own interests in protecting themselves, as well as their own families, led to many morally questionable decisions made by doctors. Dr. Mordecai Lenski recalled a time when the health services in Warsaw asked him to work in the refugee department, where the sickest of patients were held. Upon entering the shelter, Lenski immediately wanted to turn around. Yet he continued on, writing that going home now would be immoral, running away from the battlefield. When he returned home that night, his wife tried to dissuade him from taking the position. His wife argued, "You are risking your life. Your heart will not stand this. It will fail if you catch fever. We too will be at risk." Lenski ended up passing on the position to protect his family, having to live with a conscience telling him he made a mistake. He wrote this: "I was obliged to be with your refugees, offer them comfort, encourage them, help make them less bitter, rekindle their hopes, and relieve their desperation." Now, other doctors did take up the risky positions that Lenski avoided, but they often became infected by their patients and passed away. It is important to note that not all doctors were so noble, and these moral dilemmas were at every turn. Many took bribes or fell to corruption, abusing the power that they held as caretakers. Some offered clean bills of health for patients but for a price, while others overcharged on home visits. While it can sometimes feel easy to cast judgment on the actions taken by these individuals of the past, it is important to keep in mind that many of the physicians were starving and in the face of diseases with limited methods to stop themselves from becoming sick. Many, such as Lenski, had families to take care of. After all, what would we do if we were in that impossible position? When we learn about the Holocaust, we learn about the tragic loss of life that happened at killing centers such as Auschwitz. What we overlook is the complex causes of death during the Holocaust, like epidemics and the struggle of everyday life in the Jewish ghettos. Disease was everywhere. Doctors did what they could to fight diseases with the supplies that they had, but at the end of the day, they came home to starving and sick families that were just the same as their patients. It can be easy to simplify death in the Holocaust to the institutionalized killings conducted by the Nazi regime, but a more focused and critical lens lets us examine how individuals fought tooth and nail to survive the everyday conditions and illnesses that the Nazis deliberately exposed the Jewish population to.